My name is Aaron Lawson, and this is my submission for Dropbox 5.2 Part B, A Racialized Society. The question is, in Traces of the Trade, what role did racialization play in the creation and maintenance of industry commerce in Bristol, Rhode Island? To what extent do you believe the advantages and disadvantages caused by racialization may still be in effect in Bristol, Rhode Island today? I think that the entire idea of wealth of a community that is still really brokering on the organization that slave trade brought with it is really significant. Um, that old town New England type of feel, textile industry that is now a paper and printer supply factory. Those things are all there based on the history of that area. Um, had it not been for the slave trade, that town would not be what it is today. And it's really it's just something to think about. Um, it is sad um, that we had to build such a large part of our country on the backs of someone else. Um, that old New England idea that the documentarian had of being a favorite child pastime is still really fueled by those fires of slavery there and really across the country, but especially in the New England areas. Every tradesperson in town had a role to play in supporting slave trade and racism. As he said, the person who made the bolt, from the person who made the iron, from the person who took it out of the ground, had something to do with um, keeping slavery alive there. Um, but what's worse, I think, is that if someone were to say no and went a different way, they would be called a fool, ostracized, and even worse, another person would come in to take their place. And that's the saddest part. So they were really faced with, I understand what that guy was trying to say about he's not one to try to say he wouldn't have done the same thing, because who knows, I might have done the same with faced with the same decisions. Do I take what's um, coming at me easily, easy money, or do I try to turn a different direction and then someone knowing full well that someone else is going to do that? Um, in the difference between excuse me, in the difference between us, race, the power of an illusion of minds, to what extent do you think belief in the illusion of race contributes to the creation or perpetuation of perceptions that lead to racialization? To what extent has the illusion of race influenced your thinking about people whose ethnicity is different than your ethnicity? Um, the idea that I'm going to go back to the video even before about the family in New England. The idea that this family was an all Ivy League graduates um, speaks just mounds of truth into the white privilege argument there. I can't imagine anyone being able to say straight faced that they, got to go to Princeton or Harvard, especially when it's generation after generation, that they got to go to these schools based on entirely on their own laurels. Um, there is some degree of influence that the family name has to have in order to secure so many graduates of universities like that. Um, I know that in my own family, my biological family, um, I'm the first generation to graduate college, or I am of that generation. Um, my cousin also graduated, but my aunt went to night school to provide um, her education, and then her son, who's my cousin, graduated alongside me. Um, but really, the idea that that opportunity for me is there is likely that I am from a primarily white family. That opportunity may not be there if I wasn't. I don't think the education is a deciding factor of white privilege, but it is surely an indicator. There's a tendency to want to pass along privilege to the next generation, as my aunt did with my cousin. Um, and it is nearly impossible to jump from one socioeconomic class to another greater class, but even more so if the person is of color. The illusion of race idea that there is no racism inherent in our society is hard to grasp. It is nearly everything we do, or a part of everything we do, and in some part of our day is spent engaging in racially discriminating activities, even a simple thing such as paying for gas. I did want to comment on a couple of things that the video about traces of the trade, some of the things that I really just jumped out to me really earlier on, probably the first 20 minutes or so of the video. I just have a hard time thinking that we are not much different than the DeWolfs and the town in which they lived. Going back to the other things that I'm passionate about with the organization Purchased that we do a lot of things with. They promote fair trade, and applying that to our lives now, rum and Africans and sugar today quite possibly could equal electronics, Chinese laborers, and an Apple iPad. It makes you wonder back then, 200 years ago, if the founding fathers or even patriotism today and slave trade is separable at all. Are those two things, can you draw a line between those two things, patriotism and racism of the slave trade? There was a man on the video, I think he was one of the pastors of that family, said that his two biggest fears were to see Ghana and it not mean anything to him. But also the other biggest fear is for it to come alive and mean everything to him. So it creates kind of a question for us. Hearing things like this, do we become indifferent of it? Or are we consumed with passion to change something, at least change something in our life? And if that's the case, where do we start? It's the small things that are really, really difficult to narrow down. What intrinsically is racist or not fair, things like that. Something else that really popped out at me was the Portuguese church. The man said that the slaves that came over on a ship became a slave in the name of God. That was something that really struck me, that he were to say something like that, because I'm sure that to them in our Christian life back then was no different. A Christian slave trader. That's so oxymoronic. It doesn't even sound right. But I guess that's just something that I haven't been able to grasp yet. And Christian missionaries were among the first people to arrive on the boat in Ghana, and that church again was built right on top of the dungeon there. That concludes my video. Thank you.